Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canale and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. It's Mob Talk Volume 4. If you've missed 1 through 3, well, they might be in the show notes. I'm not sure. It's when I take clips from former interviews with guests on the Mafia and make a show out of them. Today, Nick Parisi, author of Mafia Confessions, King of Bootleggers, Murder. Nick Christophers, a mob expert, and talks about the Greek Mafia. Ron Fino, an undercover legacy. Then there's Andy Thibault chiming in on Louis the Coin. Louis Balestrieri, known as Louis B. He was a detective with Operation Wasteland. Andrea Giovino from Get Gotti, an author of Divorced from the Mob. George Martorano is going to be on the show, a non-violent offender who served 32 years for marijuana, but has ties in his family to the Philadelphia Mafia. Michael Green's going to chime in on the Tropicana in his early days of being mobbed up. And then last, I'm going to come back with the story of a gambling entrepreneur and the mysterious death of Tony Cornero. So to kick it off, let's hear from Nick Parisi. The bootlegging business was booming in the Massachusetts area, especially in Springfield and in West Springfield. Pascalina, Carlos's widow, becomes the queen of bootlegging. And from what I could find out, Nick, she became pretty vicious, didn't she?
Yeah, she became really vicious. She had a really good partner, though. She had Antonio Miranda. I'm sorry. That's the brother of Mike Miranda, who's at the time the consigliere to Vito Genovese. So he's Vito Genovese's right-hand man. Antonio comes to Springfield, marries Pascalina Siniscalchi, and now you get the Genovese crime family of New York City in Springfield helping Pascalina with her activities of continuing the bootlegging business. So she had some serious muscle at the time.
Yeah, she went through, after Carlos, 2 husbands, and then she was brutally gunned down. It was an unprecedented organized crime hit on a woman. And I was trying to think of another one, but this seems like probably the first time a woman was gunned down on an organized crime hit.
Yeah, and it was just after just after Giuseppe got out of jail, and that unfortunately happened to her. She did a lot of bad things herself, and some people got even.
They said that her husband / companion at the time was Michael Fiore, and he was next to the car when they brutally gunned down Pascalina and was only hit on the elbow. He himself was suspected of setting up the hit to gain control of the bootlegging business, but I believe that they finally got him cleared on that.
It's my belief, and it's many people's belief that, he was part of that hit, that he wanted to take over the family, and by doing, that he was involved in a hit on his own girlfriend, Pascalina. And his nephew is Mario Fiore. And for people that don't know who Mario Fiore is, he's a legend. He's right now the oldest living made member of the Genovese crime family. The guy's a legend. He's been a made man since the 1970s under the Scabelli regime, Big Nose Sam Kafuri, all the way to today. He's still alive. He's still conducting business in La Fiorentino Bakery every morning with his espresso. Every mobster in town goes to him for advice, because this whole story is about, my family and his family. Mm-hmm. And he was 9 years old and Pascalina was murdered. And, we'll probably be talking about it, but his uncle gets murdered also a few years later. And he was 9-10 years old at the time. He's going to be 100 years old this year. And he's still an active member of the Genovese crime family.
Well, when his uncle was taken out gangland style,
yes.
Did that then lead to the formation of what we now refer to these days as the Commission?
The Commission was formed in about 1930 in Atlantic City by John Rio. So that hit happened in 1933, just before Prohibition ended. But yeah, things were already organized at the time. So Genovese his consigliere, Antonio Miranda married Pascalina, but he died a year later. He got some blood poisoning. He was having a simple callus removed from his foot. They gave him a blood transfusion. It was from a college student, and he got gonorrhea, and he died. And, the Genovese family felt, Springfield was theirs at the time. Because, it's Vito Genovese's man that's over there running things, and he dies of gonorrhea. And Michael Fiore slips in all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden Pascalina, gets hit, and he was trying to take over the family from the Genovese family, and next thing you know, he's getting his weekly shave at the barbershop. He goes to every single week, the same day, same time, and two guys walked in and got in each of them, and they filled them up with lead. And that kind of put an end to that. And the Genovese family still controls Springfield to today.
On to Nick Christophers and his explanation of how long the Greek Mafia has been around. You've mentioned a couple of times your Greek heritage, and the Greek Mafia, I think, is something that has not gotten a lot of publicity worldwide or nationwide, at least in America, in my opinion. You've traced this all over the world. They are the silent partners of the mob world. Nick, when did the Greek mob take hold in America? Because I think this is going to be eye-opening to our listeners.
Well, as a group, as a family, they never had a family. It wasn't it's not like the Italian mob where there's a hierarchy, captains, whatever. It's not like that. It's just a group of guys. And realistically speaking, you can go back to Capone. In the Capone days, there was a guy called Sappho the Greek that was part of Capone's crew. And there was also Mike Potson, which his real name is not Mike Potson, it's Mike Padoglu, who actually ran the hotel that Capone had at the time. And Colosimo had, Joe Colosimo had. And he ran that hotel. I forgot the name of it right now, but I think it was Colosimo Hotel or something like that. He ran it after Colosimo died, and Capone took it over. So Mike Potson used to run that hotel. And he got pinched once or twice, and then he got killed. And Capone was really angry. He was trying to find the guy that murdered him because that's how tight he was with this guy. Mike the Greek, or Mike Potson was the shorter version of his name. So they kind of started infiltrating in those days, 30s, 40s, but then they didn't get really organized per se in America. I'm just talking about America now. They didn't get really organized till like the, say, 60s, 70s, like in Chicago. The number third guy was Gus Alex. And Gus Alex ran his own crew of Greek guys under him. A whole bunch of different guys that ran gambling dens all over the Cicero and different areas of Chicago. He had his own little crew under him that ran all those kind of businesses. So I would say from the 60s up until like maybe the 90s, they were pretty prominent in Detroit, New York, and Philly, where Detroit and New York and Philly were more prominent, where they actually had like 40, 50 guys under, there wasn't really a boss, really. But even though in New York, Spiro Velenzas was the quote-unquote boss of the Greek crew, and in Philly, you had Harry Petros and Steve Budas were the two bosses of the Greek Philly mob.
The Greek bosses, they're named Godfathers of the Night. What is the reason for that?
Well, Godfathers of the Night is actually a term from Greece, not here.
Okay.
Yeah, so in Greek, they would say the Notis Niktas, which means Godfather of the Night. The reason why they say that is because most of the Greek gangsters in Greece, which I mentioned in my book, and once in a chapter called Homeland, they run all the nightclubs. They run all the cabarets. They run all the gambling dens, and all of them take place at night. So they are, the godfathers of the night scene. So that's how that term came along.
Let's hear from Ron Fino, an undercover legacy. You learned how the mafia was able to control Congress, had ties to presidents, politicians, and even law enforcement officials. When you started to learn all this, was it eye-opening to you, or did you have an idea based on, because of your father, that there was some ties going on to all these different people?
At first, no. It became an eye-opener because I was shocked. It's like, I always felt that everybody that was in government, was fair and clean. I mean, that's the way, we grew up, the American way.
Yeah.
During the Eisenhower era, that's what I remember. But then as we went on and, I learned about what was going on with the Kennedys, Chicago especially wanted Kennedy because of his ties to, their ties to Joe Kennedy, Jack's father. President's father. So I learned quite a lot. And then went from there, I went to the next step. Who else was involved? For example, Peter Rodino, they wanted to run him for president, but he could not pass a background check. We had to help out Mayor James Lindsay from New York City. Now, I'm not saying he was mobbed up, but his wife was he had to move. His wife was needed help with a medical school. And we were asked to see what we could do to help his wife get the job. I was also with the hotel restaurateurs. We had to meet with the actor Paul Burke to get his son a job, either with the hotel restaurateurs or the Teamsters, one of those unions, because I knew all these people. And I was president. I was also a trustee on the Laborers International Union by that time. And I was being groomed for a bigger position with the laborers.
With everything you know, Ron, do you have doubt on how our country functions?
Of course. I have doubt. I'm like other people. I'm very skeptical today. We just see too much corruption. I'm a believer you're innocent until proven guilty. And I really believe that way. I'm not one of these people that's hell bent on getting every person in the mob because I didn't like the mob. No, just the opposite. And the trial of Johnny Riggi, it's his family, the Cavalcanti family. Johnny was the boss, supposedly is the basis for The Sopranos. And when I was teaching at the FBI, they would ask me what I thought of The Sopranos. I says, to be honest, I never watched it. And I still to this day haven't seen a segment of it.
Still haven't seen The Sopranos.
Yeah, and when I was testifying against him, I called him a quiet, humble man. He was. I'm not going to lie. He was. And one person from the DOJ says, "Why don't you throw a bouquet of roses at him?" So, but when when you're on that stand, you better tell the truth.
Yep.
Don't start a lie. Just be honest. If you don't know, you don't know.
Next on this show is Andy Thibault.
He's just a fun guy to be with, unless you had a beef with him or something. He's not like a pacifist, but he got by on his creativity, such that he trained as a con man and a street robber as a teenager in the Patriarca Family in Providence. He would sell fake cashmere sweaters to Irish mobsters at bars in Massachusetts. So he had some very serious training as a young man in the life of the lawless under the umbrella of Raymond Patriarca and organized crime in the nation and throughout the world.
You mentioned his attachment and friends that were made men. Louis was not a made man, but from what you know, did he want to be a made guy?
No, he was just talent, such that he was part of the inner circle with Raymond Patriarca, and that's not like a big circle. They would hang out at a certain bar with a vending machine company, different locations, and we would be sitting around with different hitmen, some of whom would end up killing each other for violating rules of who they could fraternize with within their group.
Let's hear from Louis Balestrieri. You eventually moved into investigating organized crime. Tell me about the Italian bread industry.
Okay. What did they do? They stick me in a case where me and this other guy, we were playing brother-in-laws. Now, the NYPD was opening up a bakery. Now, what organized crime did, they did it in many different industries, is they would open up legitimate corporations and they were running felony enterprises. Okay, so here's what happens with the Italian bread. We find out that guys who have bakeries or whatever, they can't. Did you ever hear the expression, I bought a Coca-Cola route, it's a protected route? I got a Frito-Lay's route, it's a protected, that doesn't exist. That's organized crime terminology. That means that when you bought one of these routes that are protected, you can only sell your product in a certain area. That's not the way things work. That's restraint of trade. That's all of these Donnelly Act violations. So we find out in Brooklyn that these mom and pop stores aren't allowed, they're only allowed to buy bread from certain people. Like the A&P, that, they couldn't buy bread from all these companies. So we go in, hey, how you doing? How are you? Oh, Mr. Canale, how are you? Yeah, this is me and my brother-in-law. We just opened up a place. We're in Manhattan, and what do you pay for your bread? 25 cents a loaf? Tell you what, I'll do it for 20. We can't take it from you. What do you mean you can't take it? Well, the association says we can only. What association? What are you talking about? So it's America, okay? We come from Jersey. We're over here in New York. I'll come and see you in a couple of weeks. I got this guy on the hook now. So we document all this. We do our reports. We come back a couple of weeks later, and Mr. Canale, how you doing, bro? You remember me? Yeah. Listen, we'll sell to you for $10, 10 cents a loaf. We can't take. What do you mean you can't take it? You told me that the last time. Well, the association. Come on, we're here to make money, and they don't. They shut me down again. But this is all, I'm setting this all up, me and my partner. He's doing it, I'm doing it. I come in a couple of weeks later. I'm trying to get the wise guys to come out and pay us a visit. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I come with like 4 or 5 loaves of Italian bread. And I said, look, I want you to try it for free. Just try it for free. I move all the Italian bread. I put theirs over here, over there. And I put mine there. And they start yelling at us. Hey, I'm only trying to make money here. And we leave. Eventually, they came to pay the bakery a visit. They wanted to know who's making our bread and what's going on. But what they did to me, I started to do well in this case. Okay, the case is starting to grow. It's starting to boom. And this guy and me, we were brother-in-laws. Okay, and we played it off real well. He was a smart guy too. And what did they do to me? They take me out of that team. Because why? I'm going to have to get promoted. So they stick me in a team, which was the Bad News Bears. That's the organized crime controlling the private sanitation industry. Now, what the organized crime guys did was they set up different associations. Same thing. Legitimate corporations running felony enterprises. Now, they're telling you who you can pick up, whose garbage you can pick up, what the price is going to be. They're controlling the entire industry.
And now we hear from Andrea Giovino, who has an excellent story. And to hear the entire episodes of all these shows, go to the show notes, as I'll put links to the entire episodes there. Your brother is John Silvestri. He was a hitman and started stealing car radios around the age of 13. His nickname was Johnny Bubblegum, and I love the nicknames of all the Italian guys had back in the day.
They all have nicknames,
yeah, right.
They all have those names.
At age 17, he committed his first murder. He told your mom, and did your mom say, did you make sure you put a bullet in the guy's neck? And did she want to go check the body?
Yes. She was more like, did you do the right thing? You had to do it the right way. And I remember arguing with her over that. Like, are you crazy, telling him this? But I guess, I look back now, not saying that's right or at all, but when you come from that type of area and you come from like streets and people are like back and forth killing each other. So it's kind of like kill or be killed. Mm-hmm. Like if you're putting yourself in that line of fire, it's kill or be killed, like just what we're going through today in all the big cities. Like we have a big problem in Philadelphia with that. So I think that it was a way of life. I'm not going to say it was like something that you should like glamorize. It was something of a way of life. If you're in the streets and you're making money in the streets, you're going to come up against doing something like that.
Was it encouraged then, or was it frowned upon in your family to live this life?
I think that my mom loved street guys.
Okay.
She loved mob guys. So, that's encouraged. Yeah. She loved street guys. They had money. They're charismatic. They dress nice. They spend. So yeah, she did like that. I mean, she didn't say don't go out with them. She encouraged to go out with them. And to us, I'm going to be honest with you, Tommy, that it's weird because it's so foreign to normal people about like what we're talking about murders, say. But when I look back then, that was a conversation that is very normal, like in that background, like, oh, somebody's going to get, put to sleep. Somebody's going to get whacked. We're going to, that conversation back in that era was a very common, like, way of life. So it's not like it wasn't unheard of. There were many, many kids growing up that were like that.
Yeah, it was a different life period then. It was a different
It was
norm.
a whole different life period. And it's like, it was kind of expected. You have a problem in the streets, you better take care of it. And if you don't take care of it, they're going to take care of you. So that's kind of how it was.
When did you then realize that this life wasn't the norm and the activities were illegal?
Well, I got arrested in 1992 on a RICO. Okay, on a RICO charge with, I think it was 22, 33 guys. I don't know. I had my lawyer on my podcast last night. She had pulled up all the old transcripts. And what I think that was my downfall, because that's when I realized, 17 agents busted into my house. You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute cocaine, marijuana, murders. Like, what a RICO is. You get charged with everybody else is getting charged. So I'm right in with them. And so I think with that, woke me up to realize, like, wait, what am I doing here? I'm going to lose custody. I did lose custody of one of my children. I was facing 10 years in prison. I was dragged out of my house, brought down, been arrested, facing, not just facing my charges. My husband at the time, my common law husband, I wasn't married to him, the father of my children, my two younger children, he was already incarcerated in Tennessee doing an 8-year bid for marijuana. And when I got out the next day, I said to him, John, you're going to have to do something here because I can't go away for 10 years. I got little kids. My daughter was 15 months old and my oldest was 15. So how am I going away? I got a 2.5-year-old, a 10-year-old. There's no way, you're going to have to cooperate. I can't take the stress of all of this. First of all, I said, I didn't commit murders. All I did and got arrested for was I put my money out on the street with men backing me, where I lent money to big drug dealers, say. What happens, DEA arrests one of them. We don't know he's arrested. He's already cooperating with DEA, and DEA tells him, don't pay her the money, because if you don't pay her the money, she's going to come for you. And that's exactly, it was a tactic. And I did. On wiretap, I gave instructions to go to his house, go hurt him, get my money back. So I was arrested on that conspiracy. Gotcha. So with that, but on my case, there were murders involved. So still with that RICO, you get like thrown into that. So when I had asked him, I said, John, I had nothing to do with murders. I had nothing to do with anything. I put money out on the street. I was a loan shark. The guy didn't pay back. And that's what, you better help me out here. So he decided to cooperate along with my brother, because my brother was a 3-time felon and he would have been doing life back then. Life without parole, because the laws were different. So, and that's how that whole thing. So what happens when the indictments come down, if you know anything about that, the defendant, the attorneys for the other co-defendants, my name was lifted from the indictment. So now already red flags are going, she's off the indictment, thinking she's cooperating, but I wasn't. Their names were still on the indictment, John Silvestri, John Fogarty. So now what happens is a contract put out on my life. People get arrested and go to prison for that. The feds go and come to me and say, I don't believe them. I says, I don't believe that. They brought the wiretaps to my attorney and let her listen. So by law, I had to be relocated because I had children under very young babies. And they said, if you're not relocated, you could lose custody of your children because it's negligence. You're putting the kids in harm's way.
Following Andrea is George Martorano. Listeners, he pleaded guilty to 19 counts of drug possession and distribution. That judge probably shouldn't even been on the trial because didn't he testify for your attorney?
It's the only rarest case ever in America. Well, let's go back. Let's take a step back.
Okay.
There's only 2 cases in America where the FBI gave you the drugs and let you sell them. So they gave me 26-pound of weed, 2,600 pound of weed. Not to me. I wasn't even in Philly at the time. They gave it to guys that worked for me. And made us sell the drugs, which 2,600 pound back then, it was about a little over 700,000. I'm not lying. I got my end out of it. I think I got 175 grand out of it. And the other case was Freeway Ricky Ross out of L.A. They made movies about where the CIA were giving Freeway Ricky Ross the cocaine, and using that money to fund the Contra Nicaragua movement.
Okay.
So there was only 2 cases in the books in America today. My case, when they give you the drugs, they're supposed to arrest you when you take 2 feet after they take with the drugs.
Correct.
They let us sell the drugs. Same with Freeway Ricky Ross.
Did they figure that they were going to get you to flip and talk about the Philadelphia stuff?
Oh, they what they did to me is insane. Insane what they did to me. Insane. But again, it's totally illegal. You cannot FBI cannot give you the drugs and you go sell it and keep the money. You're supposed to arrest you after you take two steps away or drive a half a block with the weed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I never did anything but weed. My guys were on tape saying about other things, but the reason I did 32 plus years is 1 count. CCE, continual criminal enterprise for marijuana.
1 count. And this is basically then, from what I was reading into your case, this is a deal from Washington making an example out of you because you didn't give them what they wanted.
Well, you got to go back to the history of Philadelphia. We had 3 mob wars back to back. Over 80 guys killed from Philly to Newark. No arrests. No arrests. They didn't have any rats then.
But they were giving out life sentences then, too.
No,
not then yet?
I was the first person.
Oh, you were the first one to get the life sentence.
Nonviolent offender in the history of America to get life, no parole. And I'm nonviolent. How can you give a nonviolent person
for weed?
For weed.
That's legal now.
So you got to remember, there was 3 mob wars. Me and my father survived that. I lost my godfather, Angelo Bruno. He was the boss for over 20 years. I love him. I still live by what he taught me, and not evil things he taught me. And they wanted, Washington is screaming. The FBI, head of FBI in Washington is screaming at the FBI in Philly. All these bodies, you just got nobody arrested. So me as a young knucklehead, I fall on weed, and they said, that's the guy you got to squeeze, put the ringers to, squeeze. And I got the blunt of it. I truly got the blunt of it.
And he never ratted, folks.
No, they put the cuffs on me. If I had known the torches that were waiting for me, I would have went like I was pulling a gun. They would have blew me away. I would have saved over millions and millions of dollars my kids would have had. And that was September 19th. Didn't get out of solitary for 5 years later.
Here's Michael Green. I'm going to give you some facts, and then I'm going to let Michael chime in on some of the old times of the Tropicana. Tony Sherman was the architect, and Taylor Construction was the general contractor. 30 investors that included Morton Downey, who had 5%, and it was leased to a guy that they call Dandy Phil, who was associate of the Genovese and New Orleans crime families. I want to take it right there from you, Michael. What do you know about Dandy Phil and all this connection to the Trop?
Well, the guy who was starting to build it was Ben Jaffe, who had the Fontainebleau in Miami. And here's an irony for you. We finally have gotten the Fontainebleau opened in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And Jaffe was out of money. He had to sell his percentage of the Fontainebleau. And Castell was one of the people the state said, And the reason is that, well, first of all, let's face it, if you're in the mob and you don't have a nickname, you haven't made it yet.
True.
We talk about Lefty Rosenthal. Okay. Well, Dandy Phil had actually worked with Arnold Rothstein back in New York. And Rothstein is the subject of one of the great lines in movie history where they mention him in The Godfather Part 2, I believe it is, where, I've always honored him. He fixed the 1919 World Series. The whole Black Sox scandal, all that goes back to Rothstein. And then after Rothstein, you have guys like Lucky Luciano and then Frank Costello. And Castell is tied to Costello. And he's in New York. He goes to New Orleans, where he continues the connection to New York, and he's involved in gambling down there. And of course, we're talking about a period where Nevada is the only state where gambling is legal. Mm-hmm. But if you think there's no other gambling going on, well, I have a Brooklyn Bridge I'd like to sell you. And Dandy Phil was involved in all that stuff, and they know he's connected to the families in New Orleans and the people in New York. So he's kind of persona non grata to the state. And a little extra background in this for what it's worth. When the Tropicana was under construction starting in 1955, that's when we first got the State Gaming Control Board. And we got that because there had been an expose in the Las Vegas Sun where it came out that Meyer Lansky was a hidden owner of the Thunderbird, which wasn't that well hidden. I suspect a lot of people in Las Vegas would have said, oh, yeah, well, all right, okay. But this inspires the state to expand its investigations, and Dandy Phil runs into that. So he's out, but it doesn't mean the mob's out. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the investors were, to use an old gambling term, square johns, meaning they're just business people who want to get a couple of points in a casino, whatever. I don't think Morton Downey is connected. He's a singer. He's an entertainer.
Yep. Didn't Sammy Davis as well have a small percentage at one time in the Trop as well?
He may have at some point, but, you will often find names of entertainers showing up in various projects, and it really depends. How much of it is just, we're just putting their name out there and so on. I don't think Sammy ever had to be licensed, whereas Sinatra and Martin did have to be. They both were involved in casino ownership, though Dean, being Dean, he once said something like, I have a point in the sands. That means I have 10% of 4 mobsters, which apparently the mobsters thought was funny, but some others don't.
Right. It was advertised as the Tiffany of the Strip when it opened, but when it opened, was there already rumblings that it was connected to the mob, or did that come in later?
Oh, there were rumblings before it opened.
Oh, before it opened.
Before it opened. Partly Dandy Phil, partly Jaffe coming out of Miami, because if you had anything to do with Miami, automatically you were thought to have something to do with Lansky, whether or not you did. And it was common. If you go up and down the Strip in 1957, when the Tropicana opens, the El Rancho Vegas was the first one on the Strip. By this time, it's owned by a guy who had some interesting connections. And there are some people out of Detroit and out of Mississippi and the frontier. And you just continue down the street. And the Sahara was the one that was often considered clear of the mob. And they had a couple of questionable characters in there. I think it was inevitable. So Las Vegas didn't get in a dither about this. And I did the oral history of an attorney named Ralph Denton, who represented a couple of different casino owners in his time, but was more of a general practitioner. And Ralph had the line, nobody walked around with a sign saying, hi, I'm Mo from the Cleveland mob. So nobody really thought about it. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's what you've done? Okay, well, now you're out here. Are you obeying the law? As it turned out, no. But it's soon after the Tropicana opens that we find out there's a little more of a connection than people realize. And that is that about, less than a month after the opening, Frank Costello gets shot in New York City, apparently by Vinny the Chin.
Right.
And he's later acquitted. But the police check his pockets, Costello's pockets, and they find a piece of paper with a number on it. And it turns out that it's the amount of money the Tropicana had made in its first weeks. And I'm not convinced the state had yet been notified. And the handwriting belonged to a guy named Lou Lederer, who was supposedly running the casino with another guy named Mickey Colohan. And they're supposed to be acceptable to the state. And they appear to be in touch with Frank Costello. And that's not good.
No, it's not good. Well, that's...
and mind you, when I say that, let's go back for a minute to you're connected to the mob. You get to the later mob where Lefty Rosenthal has a TV show, that sort of thing. And you go back to the line in the movie Bugsy, where Lansky says to Siegel, "You're becoming famous, Benny. It's good for Joe DiMaggio. It's not good for you." Well, you don't want to be famous. And if you're connected to Frank Costello, you're connected to someone famous, and you should be keeping that under wraps.
Another name that pops in, you already mentioned Foley Berger, which ended in 2009 after almost 50 years and is still the longest running show in Las Vegas history. Joe Augusto, who had no gaming license, was the owner who oversaw the skim for the Kansas City crime family. He's running a theater show, but he's really there for the mob.
Oh, absolutely. But by the time Augusto comes in, they cleared out the mob in the early days. And then when Housel's and Company sold, the mob worked its way back in. And the supposed owner at the time Augusto was there was a chemical heiress named Mitzi Stauffer Briggs. Stauffer Chemical. And she knew nothing about casinos. And Augusto was in there. He was an long-time mob guy. And he took the title of entertainment director. So he's technically the producer of the Foley Berger, which is fine. He gets to audition acts, which is what the producers do, and run the show and so on. But of course, he's really there to watch over the skim. And at the same time, Rosenthal, because he couldn't be licensed, for a time was listed as the entertainment director at the Stardust. And at one point, the guy who'd been the entertainment director at the Tropicana in the 60s, Maynard Sloat, he was down at the Union Plaza. He said he went into the management and said, "Hey, I'm the only entertainment director here who isn't skimming money for the mob. What's going on?" And Augusto is in charge of charming Mitzi Briggs and keeping her unaware. And he has a guy working with him named Carl Thomas. And Thomas had been seen as this example of how things are changing. He'd studied hotel management at the university. He comes in clean, and they eventually find him on a wiretap with the Savellas in Kansas City and Augusto, explaining how the skim works. So their job is to pump the money back to the Midwest and the Midwestern crime families. And Augusto eventually ends up testifying. He turns on a plea deal, and he dies. And there was some discussion of the fact that he died at a fairly convenient time. Well, don't know if he did or not, if there was any assistance.
Listen up for the mysterious death of Tony Cornero. July 31st, 1955. Tony told investors in a meeting in Las Vegas he needed $800,000 to stock the casino with cash and pay for food and beverage suppliers. So later that day, he went to the Desert Inn, which was right across the street from the Stardust, and played craps as he was a gambler. He was behind $10,000, and a waitress handed him a tab for $25 for food and drink. Cornero went crazy. He just went nuts over getting this tab. A waitress brings him a drink, which was a 7 and 7. It was his third drink of the night. He drinks it and fell to the floor dead. The glass disappeared in seconds. It was washed and never examined. A physician signed the death certificate immediately. His body was taken to a mortician and was in the ground in a Los Angeles cemetery 8 hours later with no autopsy report. His body was removed from the casino floor before anyone contacted the Clark County coroner or the Clark County Sheriff's Department. A coroner's jury in Los Angeles determined he died of a heart attack. Who was on the casino floor that night? You guessed it. Mo Dalitz, who was connected with the Cleveland Syndicate, who took control of the Stardust. The story goes, whether this is factual or not, that the cocktail waitress was allegedly sent to the Bahamas for a week's vacation at the Desert Inn's expense. Jake the Barber Factor from Chicago moved in position as a Stardust new owner. And in 1958, the Stardust opened and became the largest hotel in the world. It became the model for casinos from that point forward. The Stardust was imploded in 2007 and was part of the Las Vegas Skim that was operated by Argent Corporation. Resorts World now stands where the Stardust once was. Tony Cornero is credited with the concept of putting slot machines in the hotel lobbies to attract guests. The Cornero family received no compensation for his 2 years of efforts to open the casino. This was the same for Bugsy Siegel's family. There was no money for Flamingo. But Dave Berman owned a quarter of the El Cortez before it was sold, and the monetary remains transferred to the Flamingo, and he also had interest in the Riviera too. Dave Berman died on June 16, 1957, from a surgery complication. The death listed, once again, as a heart attack. His daughter, Susan, maintained that he died was fortunate for the mob, being the Riviera was in the midst of a financial crisis that was caused by Gus Greenbaum. Gus and his wife were brutally murdered at their Phoenix, Arizona home, gangland style. Berman's wife, Gladys, was pressured to give up control of her husband's power of the Flamingo and the Riviera. Gladys wouldn't do it. She died of an overdose 2 weeks later at age 39. There was a cash settlement that was made eventually for monthly payments to the daughter, Susan Berman, for $4.3 million. And there you go. Mob Talk, Volume 4. Thanks to Nick Parisi, Nick Christophers, Ron Fino, Andy Thibault, Louis Balestrieri, Andrea Giovino, George Martorano, Michael Green, and all the research that I did on myself for Tony Cornero. Please rate and review the show. Take 30 seconds to do so. That's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale, and until next time, everyone, salute, chin chin.